Good afternoon and welcome, members. I'm just going to remind you that the meeting is being broadcast online throughout Parliament buildings. Just welcome anybody who is watching online today. If you can remember to have your mobile phone muted and that no recording or photography of the meeting is allowed. So if you're content, we'll proceed with the agenda. We have apologies from Claire, and we know that Anya is on her way, as is Sinead. So any declarations of interest to declare? No. Okay, so Chairperson's business. So the Historical Institutional Abuse Memorial event, I think most of us were at that on Friday. I thought it was a very well organised, well attended event, and it was good that it all went so well. So just to advise that recent media reports suggest that the Redress Board considered the final application for compensation last week, and so I'm just going to seek your agreement to write to the department to ask for the final figures in relation to the board and seek an update on contributions from those religious orders and organisations that are yet to contribute to the scheme. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. So 3.1, individual, about the new Victims Initiative, and I'm going to refer you to pages 3 to 8 of the table pack. Just to advise that Raymond McCord wrote to me regarding a new initiative for victims and the impact of the Troubles through the prism of storytelling, and he included some correspondence and a news article with that. So I'm just going to seek your agreement to note this item and to include it for consideration at the strategic planning session in April.
Agreed.
Okay. So 3.2, correspondence from representatives of historical, clerical, child abuse. I'm going to refer you to pages 9 to 10 of your table pack. Just yet advise that I've been forwarded the reply from representatives of the historical, clerical, child abuse that they received from junior ministers in relation to the 3 research reports and cross-departmental recommendations. Ministers have advised that the representatives that they are continuing to consider the research findings carefully, and that no decision has yet been taken on whether the reports will be published. They also advised that they are willing to meet with representatives to discuss these issues further. Just to remind that the committee will hear from officials on the research and recommendations in closed session shortly, as there is no decision on whether the reports will be published. So I'm going to seek your agreement to follow up with the department on the correspondence raised on this issue. Okay. I just want to raise one issue, a further issue in relation to this. So that day, I think it's at the 11th of March. Yes. So the 11th of March, we will be hearing from representatives from the organisations campaigning on this issue in open session, and then we will have a briefing in closed session on the research reports. So in some ways, without us knowing what's in the research report and without them being able to speak to them, then it's going to be a bit awkward. So I think that circle needs to be squared. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So we don't know what's in the report. So without that knowledge, we're going to wait, do it in closed session. Yes. And okay.
So we may well in our packs
receive
it, but I think in terms of their ability to speak in the oral session beforehand, they may be a wee bit more hampered. So I think we need to try and get that resolved before to make it more meaningful. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, members, item 4, draft minutes. I'm going to refer you to pages 7 to 14 of your pack for the meeting held on the 18th of February this year. And if you're content that these minutes are a true reflection, I'll go ahead and sign them. Great. Okay, so matters arising, I'm going to refer you to page 16 of the pack. This is just a reminder that the committee agreed a press release on the HIA Memorial event via correspondence on Thursday the 19th of February. The final press release removed the referral to the Arts Council as they were not involved in the final process. So just ask you to note that item. Go ahead.
I have 2 issues to raise under matters arising.
Please go ahead, Carol. Thank you.
Okay, so we agreed last week to invite the Irish Government to the committee. So I'd like to do the same thing with the British Government as well. Okay. And even the Department of Education representatives around what's taught in the curriculum here.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Okay, and then the other issue is in terms of the committee meeting last week and Andre Murphy, was there any follow-up done?
Okay, so can I just take those in order that you've done? So
yes,
first of all,
yes.
I just would like agreement from members that we are content to invite the British UK government here, and also then representative in term. Maybe we'd ask for a written briefing in the first instance around the curriculum. No.
Well, we can ask for Chair both. I imagine we will get a written briefing.
I would imagine so.
Whether or not we will get an acceptance of the invite, I don't know, but we can certainly ask for both when we contact them.
Content with that?
Yeah.
Great.
So in terms of the update in terms of our witness last week, do you want to give it, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So following the meeting, I emailed that particular individual. Just as clerk, I have a responsibility for anybody who's in the room during the meeting, just to check that how they felt the meeting went. The response that I got back was that a person indicated that they felt that the meeting, that there was some coordinated questioning towards them, but at this point there is no follow-up. However, they did say that they would be back in touch, and we haven't heard anything more since then. So.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I just feel that when witnesses, no matter who they are, come in front of the committee, we need to deal with the issue at hand. Because, I mean, that same rule of thumb can be applied to anyone, and I don't think it's helpful. And it's actually going to put people off coming in front of this committee.
Okay, so just as an update, I don't think you were there yesterday, Philip, but at the Chairs Liaison group meeting, the representatives from the Standards and Privileges, the clerk and the senior assistant clerk, if I got the title right, came with an updated paper with some recommendations for change in terms of what goes out to witnesses in advance of committee meetings, so that they will be advised that there is the potential that maybe their social media or things that they put into the public forum in newspapers or blogs or whatever, that there is the potential that they may be raised with them in committee. So that is going out, because I do think that that's important, that people are maybe forewarned that that sort of questioning might come ahead. Go ahead, please.
I'm puzzled here because obviously Carl has raised this issue to see if there's been a follow-up, which is quite clear that you have been in touch with the witness.
I went out to her afterwards, Timothy. Sorry, just for clarity. So when we had a break, Paul had come in and said the witness was upset.
So I met her when I was taking a break.
So I went out, because I mean I'm hitting this with a straight bat. I went out to say she was alright, and she wasn't, but didn't want to engage. So I'm just saying that, did not want to engage at all. But clear to me she was upset, and that's why I'm asking. See, because she didn't engage with me, I would have actually contacted her outside this committee, but the fact that she closed me down meant that she wasn't prepared to go into it. So that's why I'm asking, because I think it's a fair enough question to ask. So just in terms of completeness, that's what happened.
Well, I came in, I met the lady in the toilet, and I said, how do you think that went? And then it was clear that she didn't feel that it had gone very well, so I came in front of everybody and said to the clerk, it may be worth following up. And he
That's
said,
where that's come from.
yes.
I was just concerned because obviously Carl said last week that she was nearly admitting to coaching her to put in a complaint, just to make sure there was nothing else unprofessionally done outside of the committee.
Oh, I can give you that assurance, Timothy. I did what I said I did, and anybody says I done different.
Well, I'm not saying you did, but I just
No.
wanted to clarify that and get the right
And
way
it
of
was done out in the hall, so everybody could have seen it. So I'm just being straightforward.
Your comments last week I thought were the worst that I heard in the committee meeting, where you were calling Philip and myself misogynist. I thought that was completely out of order, completely wrong, baseless, and I would ask you again to withdraw that.
Through the chair.
Yes, please.
So you called me misandrist?
I asked, was that the reason? Yeah.
No, and to be fair, I didn't know. I've never heard of that before. So, and I said I'm not. I just feel, and it's my own impression, that particularly when it comes to, it's a couple of female witnesses now, Timothy.
There's also male witnesses. Like, I don't treat anybody any differently.
So
I go
feel,
after the issue.
So
just one at a time,
I
like
felt
that.
you did, and that's why I said it. Okay, if I offended you, I apologise. Maybe misogynist was too strong, but what I'm pointing out is the treatment of some of the people who come in front of our committee falls below standard. You would then none to criticise me in the chair in the assembly, and the chair shut you down. I don't think it's a good look for this committee, the back and forward stuff. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, do you want to respond to that before I bring Sinead in? No. Okay, Sinead, please go ahead.
I have been in contact with the witness as well outside of the committee. She reached out to me just to thank me for raising the issue, and she did say that she was very upset. Now, I think we've disrespected the victims and survivors. I really have concerns that, you know, we talk here about trauma-informed approaches to victims and survivors, and yet we bring people in here that are representing those bodies, and we attack them based on their, well, it was based on their political views. It was based on their political views and phobia and things like that. And you were asking our personal views as well. You know, you talked about the commissioners and her valuing them. You know, your own ideas, Tim, about commissioners and the Commissioner for Irish Language and all, or, you know, you don't have a great deal of respect for them there. But she was in to represent victims and survivors, and that is what we should concentrate on, not her political views or other journalist writings that she may have. Those are her opinions. She's not a public elected representatives the way we are. We can be very robust right across one another here and still be friends, maybe even outside of this. But, you know, to take a witness in here and kind of strip her down to things that she has written before or done in previous times is totally disrespectful, but totally disrespectful to the people that she actually represents.
Was them comments directed at myself?
Well, just it happened in this room. It happened in the room.
But you're looking at myself.
Well, because you're responding, and I'm responding to you, and I'm just saying, she reached out to me as well, and I can say she was upset, and why wouldn't she be? She came in to do a job, and for the victims and survivors that she represents, about services for them, about protecting them, about their trauma. And it went off on tangents. And that can't happen, because we're going to be inviting other people in to talk about a whole load of issues in the future. And there's a fear that, you know, something that they've said in the past is going to be raised in here and publicly humiliated. It's recorded. And I don't think that that's appropriate. I think she equipped herself really, really well, I have to say that. And she didn't let herself down, and she didn't let the victims and survivors down. But should she have been questioned the way she was? I don't believe so.
Okay, I'm going to let Philip come in, please.
I think Timothy's being unfairly tarred with my brush, because it was me that raised the issues with the witness in question. So I think it's important to point out, first of all, that Relatives for Justice receive public funding, and it's my job as an elected representative to scrutinise the work of the Executive Office. The Executive Office provides funding to them. My job is also to represent the people of North Belfast and the people who voted for me. And Ms Murphy's entitled to her views, but her view is that unionists and members of the Orange Order have a disorder. I think that's a very serious accusation to have, an opinion to hold. If our taxpayers' money is being spent on giving it to people to represent victims, there are members of all religions who are victims. There are members of the Orange Order who are victims. And if I'm a victim and I read this to say that the Deputy Chief Executive of this organisation thinks that we have a disorder, it would be a dereliction of duty and a failure on my part not to raise that with her. If she's upset by that, I apologise that she's upset for that. But she wrote those words, and it's my job to hold her accountable for them.
Okay, thank you. So, did you want back in?
Do
Okay, and then we'll try and move this on. But Timothy, Carol and Timothy, and then I'm going to draw a line.
So if that's the parameters that we're all working in, then that means that some of these committees are going to become quite hostile. And as long as I've raised it as an issue, then people can't say that there was no discussion or anything else, because that will mean that every witness that comes in, their social media, their connections to political parties will be up for discussion.
Rightly so, Carol. If somebody had come in and had written to say that members of Sinn Féin and members of the GAA had a disorder, I would encourage you to challenge that.
And I would, but I do it outside a committee, Philip, and I have done it.
Well,
That's the difference.
She was appearing here as a representative for Relatives for Justice. She wrote in that capacity. I have no contact with Relatives for Justice, and this was my opportunity to raise that, and I think it would be a dereliction of duty not to raise it. Had any of the other witnesses written that about Sinn Féin or members of the nationalist community, I would encourage people to raise that, because I think it's a really, really regrettable view to hold. And I don't see how you could hold a view that somebody who, based on their political view or their religious organisation, has a disorder. I think it's just mad stuff.
I wouldn't use those words.
No, I know you wouldn't, Carol.
I wouldn't, honestly.
Yeah.
Let me just move on. I was going to let Timothy speak, and then I think we do need to move on, members.
Essentially, we need to remember this as a scrutiny committee, and somebody that comes in front of this committee to give evidence needs to stand over positions they've taken in the past. If it relates to their job, which in this case it did, I believe that that's a fair point to call them out on and ask for their response. I don't think at any point last week did any member go outside the boundaries when we were questioning witnesses, but as I've already raised, my concern is what happened in the aftermath after that, where somebody labelled Philip and myself misogynist based on our line of questioning, based on us carrying out our function.
I think Carol has addressed that.
She has, but if
I didn't apologise to Philip, I apologised to Timothy.
Yeah, so
very
We
good.
accept the apology and move on.
yeah.
Okay.
But I do think there has to be more robustness in committee and let that flow and let that perform its duties. We can't be seen as a toothless committee. We're here to do a job for the public, and we must be seen to enact that.
Well, last week the 5 witnesses were here to speak about the delivery of that strategy for victims and survivors of the conflict and troubles, and the clerk and his team here asked each of them to pick a pillar within that strategy, and it was up to us to ask them questions in that vein. So I do, and that's what we were meant to be scrutinising last week, not necessarily going as wide, but I gave a bit of latitude last week. I'm ready to move on, members.
Yep.
Members, item 6 then, so we're going to take an oral briefing from the Commissioner for Public Appointments, and I'm going to seek your agreement to ask Councillor to record this session. Great. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, while the Commissioner comes into the room, I'm just going to refer you to pages 18 to 20 for the clerk's brief, pages 21 to 25 for a written briefing, and pages 26 to 71 of the pack for a copy of the annual report from 2019 to 2020. So I'm going to welcome to the meeting Clerk, the Commissioner for Public Appointments. So thank you for your submissions in advance, and I'll just invite you to go ahead and make some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
First of all, good afternoon to you all, and those members that I've met before, it's very nice to see you again. Those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, I shall look forward to working with you over the years ahead, and it's nice to see you. My name's Claire Keating, and I'm the Commissioner for Public Appointments. I was appointed in August 2025. As you'll be aware, there's been a significant gap since the previous Commissioner was in post. From May 21 to August 25, there was no Commissioner for Public Appointments, and therefore no regulation, investigation or audit in relation to public appointments. The role I hold is described quite often as the guardian of the public appointment process, but my functions and powers and duties as a regulator are set out very clearly in legislation, which is the Commissioner for Public Appointments Northern Ireland Order 1995, which has been amended twice, most recently in 2010. The Commissioner's post was established following recommendations of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, the Nolan report in 1995, particularly topical at all times, but particularly topical in the last couple of weeks. The legislation has been amended twice now to take account of the progressive devolution of powers and duties to the Northern Ireland Executive, and to set out in the order the list of public bodies that are regulated by the Commissioner for Public Appointments. Public bodies that are set out, that are actually listed on the order, are known as regulated bodies, and there are also, of course, bodies that have been developed since 2010, which are not listed anywhere on the legislation, and those are referred to as unregulated bodies, unregulated bodies. And there's some of those in each government department, some linked to each department. So my functions really are to regulate and monitor policy and procedure in terms of ministerial public appointments, to ensure that departments operate systems that are able to include everyone who's got the relevant skills and experience and wishes to put themselves forward for public appointments, to put themselves so forward, and to ensure that applicants are treated fairly throughout the public appointment process, and always in a manner that's fair, consistent, considerate, open and transparent, with the goal of enabling ministers to select the best candidate on merit for public appointments. So to deliver that regulation, I have a number of duties. I published and developed a code of practice for ministerial public appointments, audit the policies and practices of departments in making public appointments to establish whether that code of practice has been adhered to. I can require departments to provide me with information about any public appointment process and conduct inquiries into the policies and practices of any department regarding public appointments. What I also do is provide independent assessors as panel members for all public appointment competitions. They provide that independent role on each panel. And I can also investigate complaints from applicants for regulated public appointments, people who are dissatisfied with the process that they've gone through. The Commissioner's Office is staffed by 3 people, civil servants provided to me by TEO, a grade 7, my colleague David Spear is with me today, a staff officer and an EO2. So it's a small team, but now, as from last week, perfectly formed, all the staff now in place. And as the Commissioner, I'm engaged to work 75 days a year, so sort of a day and a half a week kind of a basis. I'm conscious of my previous Commissioners' working days were extended to 100 days a year to better reflect the nature of the work, so I will be looking to do that going forward. Obviously budget subject, because it does better reflect the reality of the role. I have a small operating budget of around about £6,000 after staffing costs, but so far in my role the priorities have been, as you would imagine after a period of nearly 5 years with no Commissioner, the re-establishment of a staffed office that can carry out statutory and regulatory functions. I set out to identify and confirm the legal standing of my legal standing in relation to public bodies that are not included on the legislation, on the 1995 order. I've engaged with a number of stakeholders, public appointments units, ministers, civil servants and others, and I've provided advice and guidance to departments about public appointments, including those matters when they want exceptions to the code of practice, maybe for an extension to a public appointment or other variations. And I think the key issues that I've identified so far really is that there is a significant regulatory gap. 4.5 years without a regulator is not a good thing, and it leaves space where there haven't been audits, obviously there haven't been inquiries made, and there's been no redress for anybody to complain about their appointment process, and that's a long time, and I would hope that that doesn't happen going forward. And obviously no audits of departmental processes or inquiries could have been made during that time. It's also not been possible. I had originally the Commission had a pool, I think, of about 40 independent assessors. I'm now down to 7. And it's not been possible during that gap to appoint new independent assessors, and they are an absolutely essential part of any public appointment process. And the wheels of the system here wheel very slowly, so I'm having to liaise quite closely with TEO to try and make sure that I can move that recruitment process for a new pool of independent assessors forward. That's considerably more speed than I'm being told it'll take. I would like to say that the staff team at the Office of the Commissioner for Public Appointments 21 to 25 did an excellent job. They provided support, guidance and information to departments while no regulatory activity took place. And they did have an exemplary reputation for being helpful and positive and constructive. But sadly for me, they moved the week before I took up post. But they did do a remarkably good job and they get very good feedback. I think the 1995 order hasn't been updated since 2010, so the list of public bodies that are regulated is out of date. So there'll be a number of new bodies that are not listed and therefore not regulated. And my legal functions do only cover regulated public bodies. I took specific legal advice to clarify my various, which means I can only investigate complaints from applicants to regulated public appointments. And that leaves a large gap. If you advertise a post for an unregulated public appointment, those complainants will not have an independent complaint route at this point. And the other obvious risk area is in relation to independent assessors and making sure that I can recruit a new pool of those assessors as promptly as possible to make sure that they can be allocated to every single public appointment competition, because without them in place, it will hold up public appointment competitions and nobody wants that. So that's really my outline first. So thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to engage with any of your questions or comments regarding my functions.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. So just on the issue of the 1995 order, I'm just wondering if you initiated conversations with the Executive Office in terms of getting the legislation updated?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
There are conversations ongoing. There is work ongoing within the Executive Office to revise that legislation. I've been in formal conversations with them about some of the content of what that needs to look like. And I've made it very clear that, from my perspective, it is a very urgent matter and it can't really be left to sit. And it does seem to be moving at a reasonable pace.
Okay, so are you getting an indication that it could come forward to this committee within this mandate, for example?
I couldn't say.
You couldn't say?
I couldn't say, I'm afraid.
Maybe we could chase that up.
The only indications I've got is that the work in the office is being done as promptly as they can, and that I've been engaged with what that could look like.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking at the list in the annual report then of the ones that relate to the Executive Office that are unrelated, and I'm conscious then since that we've had the Irish Language Commissioner, Ulster Scots Commissioner and the Director of the Office of Identity and Cultural Expression, and I'm just wondering, did you have any role in advising the appointments for those 3 recently appointed Commissioners stroke Directors?
No, they were advertised and they were advertised before I was in post.
Okay.
So they were advertised and then I came into post once they were up and running.
So, for example, just say there's going to be a new commissioner advertised next week that's not regulated. What role would you have in that space, or would you not?
I would have a role in providing an independent assessor.
Okay.
That I would expect that all departments run their unregulated competitions in the spirit of the Code of Practice for Ministerial Public Appointments.
Okay.
So it's clearly run in the spirit of it. But when it comes to the point of complaints, I would have no function. So those complaints, the department itself will have to work out what its complaints process will need to be as a second level kind of a complaint after they've had a look at it. But that would have, I'm afraid, nothing to do. It's not because I'm being difficult about it. I simply do not have the legal standing to act in relation to unregulated appointments.
Okay, thank you. So, in terms of the audit there to review the policies and practices of departments in making public appointments, obviously as a committee we're very conscious of the diversity of our society, and I'm just wondering what work you're going to be doing in terms of trying to attract people from different ethnic minority backgrounds or non-traditional communities and stuff. Is that a longer term piece of work, or what's happening in that space?
I think it's probably slightly wider than that.
Okay.
And it's probably one of the most important mechanisms by which ministers get the widest possible range of people to choose from to make their selection based on merit. Depends on having a wide pool of people in the first place who've applied. So there's poor evidence about the actual numbers of different Section 75 protected characteristics groups on boards, for the simple reason that when you fill in the monitoring form, of course, on any application, you self-identify, and so you can choose whatever you like to put down, and then on top of that, of course, a lot of people don't fill it in. So the actual information is quite patchy, but there's an obvious kind of underrepresentation of women and ethnic minorities, I would say in particular, and also people with disabilities. It's quite clear. So I think some of my role will be about making public appointments better understood more widely. I think there are a very large number of people in the third sector, in business, people who've had caring responsibilities, people who've been self-employed and run small businesses, who are really unaware that the public appointment process is also for them, and that they have something very significant to contribute. So it's looking at making public appointments better understood, as well as going out on a targeted basis to meet with women's organisations, disability organisations, the new cultural advisors and language advisors, all those sorts of people, to try and encourage the widest possible pool of people coming forward. But it is an important area of work, both for fairness and equality and transparency, and also because what we need is a merit-based selection where the widest possible of people get through to ministers to choose.
Okay, thank you very much. Deputy Chair, please.
Thank you, and again, warm welcome to you in a very different Commissioner role than the last time. And thank you for what the information you've given us so far. And as you've said yourself, there has been a gap in Commissioners between 21 and 25. What impact do you think that gap has had on the integrity of the public appointment system? And do you have a plan to, or indeed a timetable to catch up on that missing oversight period?
I can look back over, if there were any complaints in, I can go back for 12 months.
Okay.
So I can retrospectively investigate complaints over a 12-month period, if they're in place. But what I will do is I'll establish a programme of inquiries, audits and engagement largely for next financial year, which will go to see what actually is it we don't know. And I'll probably be looking as well as on a risk basis, so if there are particular appointments that have caused challenge or difficulty, I may audit against those, that whole process, see if it was done properly. I may also audit thematically, so I may look, for example, at questions like what were the numbers of people with disabilities who asked for a reasonable adjustment during the process over the last year, or in particular competitions. So it's that kind of a programmed approach that I plan to take. In terms of the actual harm that has been done, I think it's quite hard to quantify at this stage. I haven't yet gone to departments to ask their view on that, but I think it's an interesting question. But I think the fact that advice and support was provided is a really helpful thing throughout the process, but I do think it's a gap, a terrible pity to have had such a long gap where actually you can't hold anybody's feet to the fire, and particularly where complainants haven't had redress.
And as you said, complainants could have redress over the previous 12 months to your appointment, but not beyond that. That's right. Going backwards.
Except in exceptional, if I deemed it an exceptional circumstance,
okay,
the legislation would let me go further.
Okay, but so will you ultimately have an analysis of the number of complaints, and hopefully there weren't too many, but will you have an analysis of the complaints over that gap period so that we can have that information in the future?
Probably not. And the reason I probably won't is, of course, because generally speaking, people didn't make complaints because they were told that they couldn't be investigated.
Yeah, okay.
So it's becomes a
bother.
circular kind of a conversation, really. So unfortunately, that kind of evidence may not be there.
Yeah.
It may be possible to ask departments how many complaints came through to them, but it wouldn't be possible from my office's point of view.
In terms of the fast-moving pace, I don't know that actually reason why I said those words, fast-moving pace in the Executive Office, but anyway, in light of the number of public appointments across departments taking place, what action are you taking to remind departments that you do now exist, that there is a code, and that you do have those powers to investigate?
I've been in direct contact with all of the permanent secretaries. I've written to all of the ministers to advise them of my legal standing and that I'm in post. Offered an invitation to meet. I've met with a number of ministers already, and some more still to go. I've also met with all the public appointments units, staff in all the public appointments units, and engaged directly with them and keep as open a door as we possibly can. So I think they all know that the office is up and running again. The challenge really, I suppose, is to match the programme of work that I have in a timely fashion. As I said, my full team of staff was only available last week. That was when they were finally in post. So it's a slow process. But next year's plan of work will quite clearly address those issues.
And in recruiting panel members, you will have a period of training for them, provide some sort of initiation responsibilities for them and training for them, and that you in turn will be able to roll that out across the public sector organisations so that they will understand what your role is going to be. Because there are a 4-year gap is a big gap. Many of the HR people and others that will be on interview panels will have moved on, and you will have people who will never have come across the Public Appointments Commissioner or your role. May I also ask you, with regards to those areas for which you don't have regulated authority, will you be doing an analysis of that? And are there responsibilities which you feel you don't need to regulate for, and will you produce a comprehensive list of those positions that you feel that urgently need to be regulated for?
I'll start back. My responsibilities do extend to providing advice and support to departments to get it right with all their public appointments, regulated or unregulated. Yeah. It also exists to strongly encouraging all departments to state that they're operating those recruitment processes in the spirit of the Code of Practice, and also to demonstrate that they've got a complaints process themselves when I can't investigate it. So that amount of lean. It also extends to providing an independent assessor for each of those recruitment processes. It just doesn't apply. It just doesn't really come down to complaints, but it does apply to all the other aspects, really.
And in respect of those organisations which currently fall outside your remit, will you be making representations to the TEO to have them included?
Absolutely. And as I understand it, all departments are now collating The last published list was in the Commissioner for Public Appointments Annual Report 1920, which sets out the lists that were then regulated and unregulated.
There's a big gap.
So it's a big gap after that. But that's a matter for for departments to collate, and that's being done in relation to the legislative work to update the order. So that is being collated and being done. But I still expect all departments to be in touch with my office when there's a new public appointment coming through, so they can be advised, supported and allocated an independent assessor.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Chair.
Carol, please.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I'm looking at the list of independent assessors. You said in your report, page 71, that the list that's there, what I'm trying to ascertain is how many of your current independent assessors are from this list?
This is the 2019-2020 annual report, is it?
Yeah, page 71.
Sorry, it's actually 45 in your pack, Claire, I think,
Page 45 of the report.
in the report.
Sorry, you're right, page. Okay, so see page 45
Yeah.
of your report,
Yeah.
and it's like Annex 4.
Okay, I've got you. Sorry, I'm at page 46, Carol. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Of those independent assessors, I've got 7 left.
7, okay. What I'm trying to ascertain is, you've also mentioned in your report, under the titles Diversity and Disability in Public Life, that there's a lack of representation. So, and this is something that I've been uncomfortable with as a minister, so just declare that, but it seems the same sort of people go from one board to another, and they do so with ease, and the concern is that when it comes to class, gender, ethnicity, ability, that there's a lot of underrepresentation, and that may be down to individual departments and her. So what can you do to make sure, first of all, your independent assessors aren't part of that ever-shifting pool of people, and secondly, how can we make sure there's more diversity in our public appointments?
First, if I address the independent assessors first, they're recruited specifically to be panel members for public appointment processes. That's what they can only hold one public appointment themselves at any time. So they can't get all the information about how to be an independent assessor and then circulate around lots and lots of public appointments. I think in terms of widening the pool, though, it's a complicated job. I mean, there's not, as I said, not desperately clear evidence about the hard numbers of who's who on which panel. But it is clear that certainly certain types of expertise and experience don't get represented widely in public appointments, that you're not seeing as many people coming through who've had caring experience, third sector experience, small business, people with disabilities, ethnic minorities. There is better representation of women, but I still don't think it's as good as it should be. And certainly people with disabilities are significantly underrepresented.
Really?
So I think I will undertake a programme of engagement directly with those kinds of organisations that represent those people and those groups, as well as some kind of programme which works with departments to challenge them a little bit and support them to make sure that they're doing some outreach as well as placing the advert to try and encourage the widest possible range of applicants. Because on some, I mean, there's one reasonably recently, one public appointment for which there were no applications at all. It was an unremunerated position with no applications whatsoever. And they're all important aspects of public service delivery, and they're interesting. So I think there's a lot of outreach still to be done so that people better understand what the role is, what the accountability is, what they're actually responsible for on it, and to draw people who've got a wide range of experience. But I will go out on an outreach programme to those organisations as best I can.
And I appreciate that, just your work as a former Commissioner for Older People. I've absolutely no doubt you'll do that. Just for clarity, I'm aware that you can only be on one board at a time, but from the list in page 45, and I'm not picking any names out, but I recognise some names who've been on loads of boards, for want of a better term. And I just feel that that in order to make other people feel that they could see themselves, then, because if you can't see it, you just won't be it. So, and it's not to criticise anyone on that list, just to be clear, but I do recognise a lot of names from different boards that have came across in my own work as an MLA. So I'll just leave it there.
No, and I'm sure, I mean, it's an important area in how we advertise for new independent assessors, who they are, where we recruit them from, because they need to be robust individuals with experience really to learn what the processes are for the appointment process, but also to be able to stand up and challenge, constructively challenge and be engaged in the process and ensure compliance with equality.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Timothy, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Commissioner. Welcome along to committee. I suppose going straight into it, page 2.
Sorry, Ms. Gasson, of what?
Page 2 of your introductory briefing. So it's not the annual report, it's the first couple of pages, that paragraph 110. CPA&I's work supports equality, diversity and good governance in public appointments and supports public confidence and standards in public life. Would you say that's a fair summary of your officer's role?
I think they're important issues. I think a fairer summary is to make sure that the best people get through the selection process as fairly and openly and transparently as possible for ministers to make the choice of the best person for the role on merit. But without a doubt, widening that pool of people gets you through to more people at the interview and selection process, and therefore to the widest pool of people.
Moving on to the report, so I see here it's 1920, and I appreciate that was it 4 years? Nobody has been in post, which essentially is 5 years worth of annual reports. Do you envisage that come the end of the financial year, April, May, June time, having a report for 25-26? That would be an outcome that you...
That has to be published by June.
June? So that would be the first one in 5 years.
That'll be the first one.
Yeah, in that report under diversity...
This is the 2019-2020 report.
Yep, page 6, it says, from the outset of my tenure, I have promoted the objective of diversity on public boards in Northern Ireland. Now, I appreciate that's the last commissioner, but I'm getting a feeling that diversity is an overriding theme that the Commissioner for Public Appointments is trying to push. Would you stand over the same sentiment that the last Commissioner stated, in that from the outset of my tenure I promoted the objective of diversity on public boards in Northern Ireland?
I stand over the principle that public appointments matter because public services matter. That's why it matters. And that's why it matters that the widest possible range of people, whatever you call it, whether you call it widening the pool of applicants or encouraging people from underrepresented groups or equality, diversity and inclusion, I'm less hung up on what we call it in a sense rather than that we look at who those people are. Because those public services matter so much and those arm's length bodies spend the majority of the executive's money, it matters who comes through that pool. So no, I wouldn't say I have an overriding commitment to one element of my function over another, but I have a responsibility to make sure that the appointment processes are fair and transparent, and in order to exercise the merit principle, the widest possible range of people have to be encouraged and able to go through that process.
Yep. Page 13, then 4.2. It goes on to talk about to promote good governance, including diversity in our public boards. So this is a long-running theme, essentially, that the last Commissioner had. And I went back to the 1995 order. And you've alluded to this where it's selection on merit.
Yeah.
And what it says of the functions of the Commissioner shall, in the manner he considers best, calculate to promote economy, efficiency and effectiveness in the procedures for making public appointments, exercise his functions with the object of maintaining the principle of selection on merit in relation to public appointments. My concern is that since the 1995 order, this whole theme of diversity has crept in. Now, I understand reaching out to as many people as possible. Absolutely, have no problem with that. But it's coming across as an overriding theme that diversity should matter as much as merit, whereas I'm strongly of the belief you can reach, and you should be reaching into different communities and different backgrounds, but at the same time, just because somebody their belief should be to change the make-up of a board that that person would fit better doesn't mean they're the best person for the job.
No, it doesn't, and I don't get a sense at all of any desire for tokenism. I mean, I've been a board member myself, and I do not want to be there because I'm female. I do not want somebody to be able to say, well, she only got the job because she's female. I have no interest in that, and I don't detect an interest in tokenism or that kind of attitude around members of the Legislative Assembly at all. But I think the evidence is reasonably clear that the wider the pool of people we draw from, and the wider the range of experiences that people come from, I would argue that produces wider range of thinking, more likelihood that people will lift a stone, turn it over, have a look, question stuff differently, and bring different expertise to a board than if we draw people from the same professional backgrounds, the same parts of geography, or same of any other kind of categories of people. I think it is about merit, but it's about making sure that we recognise that merit exists in a very wide range of places.
So you would accept that the only legally binding principle in the 1995 order is indeed merit?
It is to make sure that they are transparent, fair, open, and on the merit principle.
Yeah. So what does diversity, and we've heard quite a bit of it in the questions so far, so what does diversity look like to you?
A bit clear in your question, because that's quite a wide-ranging kind of a question. So in relation to my role,
Yeah. So
how can I help you?
we've essentially, there's been a number of questions talking about diversity as a whole, and I'm wanting to unpick what diversity looks like. In your view, what is your definition of diversity?
I suppose my definition of diversity is at every stage of the process. So it is right through from that we recognise what our society looks like, we recognise who's in it, we recognise that in order to reach and identify all those people and their interests and what's likely to encourage them to apply for a public appointment. We may advertise in different places, but sometimes may place local advertisements, may do engagements with particular sectoral interests. For example, if you had a farming-related public appointment, people may go and talk to some of the farming organisations, and comparably with all sorts of other organisations. And that when you get to the appointment and you get a range of people on those boards, they represent as widely as possible the interests, aptitudes and abilities of the widest possible range of people. That's what diversity means to me. It does not look tokenistic and it doesn't look shallow. It looks like the best expertise trawled from as many places as possible to represent selection on merit and then the best decision making around a board table. That's what it looks like to me.
Yep, 68, page 68 of the pack, lists an activity promotion of the Northern Ireland Executive gender targets for appointment of members and chairs of public bodies. So is that a case of promoting equality of opportunity or equality of outcome if you're trying to work to the gender targets of the Northern Ireland Executive?
As I understand it, those targets are no longer in place.
That's been done away with?
As I understand it. My focus has not been entirely on diversity and equality inclusion. I haven't dug as far as I would intend to yet into exactly what happened to those targets, but my understanding is they are no longer there.
Yep. On the TO, unregulated bodies, has your own office there, Commissioner for Public Appointments. Is that something that you want regulated?
I can't regulate myself.
I'm glad to hear you say that. But I just see that as the unregulated bodies, and the only unregulated, essentially the only ones that regulate themselves that have an interest is MLAs when it comes to their pay or their trustees for the pension. So on a week that it's been, it's refreshing to hear that. So who should regulate your office on that basis?
I think that is a really interesting question, because I don't know what the answer to that is yet. I've got engagements to have within TEO to see what happens to complaints procedures, for example. If somebody had a complaint in relation to the appointment process that I went through, where did they go? And I'm not sure. And going forward, once we get the order updated and public bodies included on it, with a mechanism for me to be able to regulate as soon as new public bodies come on, this will be one of the outstanding kind of offices. And I'm interested to see what the Executive Office think their way forward is in terms of having a proper, fair complaints procedure, because they won't be able to be investigated by my office.
And last area that I want to explore with you is there's no mention of religion in your submission.
In which submission here?
Your submission that you put in today.
Oh, it is.
So in 2012 you had Conor Murphy, who was found guilty of discrimination when Alan Lane, the president, took a case after being overlooked for Northern Ireland water. It was shown there was a material bias against the appointment of candidates from a Protestant background. So that is the only case I can essentially, when I done research into it, that I can come out with. But yet there's no mention of religion, where there is a live case where it's shown discrimination took place in a public appointment.
So I'm not understanding what the actual question is. What would you like me to...
So back in 2012,
I understand the case, the issue you're talking about.
what would your office do differently to ensure that doesn't happen?
Oh, I mean, there'll be if there's an investigation in a public appointments process, and the complainants come in, or there's an issue that's arisen with the public appointments process, I'll carry out an audit or a complaints process and investigation. I'll publish the findings of both of those. The complainant would have redress if they were found in their favour, would have redress through the Industrial and Fair Employment Tribunals. And if there's findings in relation to ministers, it comes back through assembly processes.
Yeah. So religion hasn't been mentioned in your submission. Is that something you're actively going to promote? So you're talking
across
about
all the equality across all the Section 75 groups, including religion.
there's plenty in diversity, but there was a live case where there was found discrimination, and it's not mentioned. But I'm just making sure that you're aware. And essentially, it's high on your list of your job. Essentially, your what to go after in your role or your new role as a commissioner. So no. I'm happy enough. Thank you very much,
Okay,
Chair.
thank
I think
you.
just pick up your point there. I mean, I think previous commissioners have generally operated what they've called a risk-based approach to auditing. So looking at if there's a particular competition that's caused concern for whatever reason, then they've then carried out an audit against the process that went through there. I may also look thematically across issues. So as I said, in terms of, for example, in relation to disability, I could look thematically as well. So I'll look and see where the evidence takes me in terms of what issues have been discovered before, as well as what current risk-based approach I need to take and what thematic approach would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Philip, please.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations, Commissioner, on your appointment. Just a couple of things at the start. So you had outlined that you had written to executive ministers following your appointment. Some had met you, some are yet to be scheduled. You wouldn't mind giving an overview to the committee of which ministers you have met to date?
I've met with Minister Archibald and I've met with Minister Long. I have an appointment pending with Minister Muir, and I've had correspondence from at least two other ministers saying they're content with the briefing that they've had and don't need to meet me at this time, but their doors are open. And I've briefed all of the permanent secretaries, so the ministers can reasonably be understood to have been briefed and may not feel the need to meet at this time. But my correspondence to them is clear that my doors are open.
Perfect. Are you currently investigating any complaints in relation to public appointments processes?
No.
No. When was the last investigation then that was carried out by your office?
By my office, I will have been in 2019-2020.
And in terms of the average amount of complaints then, if you've looked back historically?
I haven't reviewed the number of complaints kind of coming through compared to the number that were actually subject of investigation and compared to the outcomes of those investigations. I haven't done that piece of work yet. I think actually the more important thing going forward is to make sure that departments and applicants are really clear what the complaints process is and that they feel confident in my office to approach with a complaint if they have one and that it will be properly investigated.
And are you aware then of examples of when the Commissioner has found that there has been a breach?
Yes. Those are all published. They're on my website. They all are available for public, anonymised, but for public reading.
And what would be the most recent example?
I couldn't give you a date. I can certainly send you the most recent.
Yeah.
I can get the most recent example sent to you.
So I just wanted to pick up the case that Timothy had highlighted, and that was the finding by the Fair Employment Tribunal in 2012. So that was that Dr. Alan Lennon, OBE, took a case against the Department for Regional Development when he was overlooked for the position of Chair of Northern Ireland Water. The tribunal ruled that Dr. Lennon had been subject to unlawful discrimination on the grounds of religious belief. The findings was that Mr. Sean Hogan, a Catholic, was appointed as Chair of Northern Ireland Water because he was not from a Protestant background and because he was known to Minister Murphy and Minister Murphy's ministerial colleagues. So what are the implications for a minister or a government department if they do breach the code?
If they're in breach of the code, I'll make a formal report which says what my findings are in relation to the process and the actions that have been taken. If it's the complainant in the process, they will have redress through industrial fair employment tribunals, and any matters involving ministers will come back through assembly processes. So,
what does that mean or look like then, assembly processes? So, for example, 2012, this was the first case in the history of the state of Northern Ireland that a minister was found to be in breach of the Fair Employment Tribunal for religious discrimination. So if that was to happen again, what is the implication or consequence for a minister who discriminates against someone, either based on their religion, political belief, or any other protected minority protections?
My role really is to do with the process and investigating complaints from complainants about the processes and auditing those processes. So as to what happens to an individual minister is out of my jurisdiction.
Make no recommendations?
I would about the process. I would about the process that's been undertaken, certainly. As I audit a complaint or audit an issue, I would go kind of from top to toe in the process about what happened and what the evidence is in relation to my code of practice. And that's really where my role stops.
So if it stops there, I was just reading the concluding marks of the Equality Commission statement at the time who supported the applicant. So it said, we were also pleased to note the commitment made to the Fair Employment Tribunal that the Department would look at issues arising from the Tribunal hearings and discuss these with the Equality Commission and with the Commissioner for Public Appointments in Northern Ireland. So that's after the process, that's after the investigation. So what would those discussions look like?
They would look, I know I haven't reviewed the case in detail,
that.
But what they would look like in any case like that is they would look like, what additional advice and support and information do you need? Do you understand what the Code of Practice for Ministerial Public Appointments requires you to do? Do you need any further training, any further assistance, further information before you can go ahead with the next appointment? What is the additional support and guidance that you need in order to be able to do your function properly? So it would look like on the front foot, providing that advice and support, and I would then probably expect that would be a risk-based assessment in terms of an audit. It may well be a public appointment that at the end of the process I would audit how well the compliance had taken place.
Okay, so you would give recommendation for training for people how not to be sectarian and not to engage in sectarian discrimination?
It's not so much recommendations not to do that.
Yeah.
It's advice, guidance, support and assistance to be able to demonstrate that they comply with the code of conduct, the code of practice for ministerial public appointments, and that may include information, training and advice. But it's in that.
Sure. Final question for me. So there's a bill coming through the Assembly at the minute, the Financial Provisions Bill, which is like a catch-all bill, and in many occasions a lot of departments use it to bring legislation up to speed on a number of issues where they may not qualify for a standalone bill, for example. Have your office given any thoughts to there could be some amendments to the Financial Provisions Bill that would allow regulation in some of these public appointments that have developed since the previous order?
No, that's not the way it seems to be going forward.
Okay.
The Executive Office are working on updating the order and checking that it's fit for purpose in terms of its language, as well as the bodies are on it, and also looking to find a mechanism by which, rather than having to keep coming back and updating the order, my regulatory functions can apply to new bodies as they come in. But I haven't looked at it, and I'm not aware of it being looked at through the financial bill.
Okay, no, I understand, and it's something the committee may wish to take up because, and listen, my party sits in that office, but it wouldn't be the quickest office in terms of doing work. So, it's clearly this legislation and order is out of date and it needs to be brought up to speed as quickly as possible. So, something the committee may wish to look at. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you. And Anya, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for coming in and briefing us today. I've just a number of questions. I know others have covered some of them. So just in relation to the new recruitment process, has that commenced yet?
excuse me, for the independent
For the
assessors.
assessors, yes.
No, it hasn't commenced yet. The work's been undertaken from my office side to make sure that the paperwork's in order, the candidate information books are ready. And also we have the money allocated to us for within this financial year. Sadly, the processes, as I understand it, of HR Connect run quite slowly. And it looks at the moment as though those processes will not be able to deliver the recruitment process within this financial year. And what I'm advised at this point is that means I will then have to bid in June monitoring for money, which I might or might not get, which frankly would mean that nobody would be in post before September at the very earliest. And then, as colleagues referred to earlier, there's training and induction to do. And that puts at risk a significant number of public appointments. If that can't be addressed and speeded up, or some kind of risk basis of providing the money across the financial years so that I can carry out the recruitment exercise earlier, it's a risk.
And just in terms of the allocation, then I'm assuming you will be going back to TO coming into the next financial year and putting that ask to them, and then hopefully not, but possibly leading into the June monitoring round as well. In relation to the number of audits that have taken place since you have come in, how many has occurred? None.
The chap who has just been appointed to deal with audit and compliance started last week. There's been nobody in that position up until that point, so there's not been possible to carry out any audits at all yet.
Okay, and just come back to updated lists within departments, and I suppose a department's ability to update lists based on any new bodies coming in and even unregulated bodies. Would departments have the ability to do that via statutory regulation at all?
If I've understood you right, they don't seem to think so. The 1995 audit is really, really specific. It's very short and it's really, really specific. And I've taken independent legal advice, which is really very clear about if it's not a regulated public appointment, it's not a regulated public appointment. There's no really grey area with it. And it seems that updating of that order with some kind of provision in it to make sure that I can regulate bodies as they are developed is the only way forward.
Okay. And just one final question, Claire, and I can't remember, it's one of the annexes as I was scrolling down there. In 2018 there was exemptions to the code in relation to emergency appointments, obviously given the fact that there was no ministers in post, and there was quite a few emergency appointments made over that period. What safeguards would have been put in place whilst those emergency appointments were made?
I mean, the responsibility of myself as the Commissioner is to be both reasonable and proportionate, as well as to ensure adherence to the code. So exemptions to the code are requested. Usually it's an emergency situation. So some organisation, maybe a chair's unwell, and you need to replace them quickly with somebody for a short-term basis, or you need an extension. So maybe somebody's been appointed to the role, but they don't want to take up the role for another 4 months. They're finishing something off, so could we extend the chair role for a couple of months? That's the usual kind of a way with it. The safeguards really are, I suppose, a lot of the time it rests in the evidence that's provided to me by the department about why they're looking for the exception, and it then depends then on my reasonable judgment as well to see what is proportionate, fair value for money and reasonable. But there's a difference, for example, between an extension of a chair's role for a couple of months because there's a particular issue, or an extension of a chair's role. Nobody's asked for it, but for 2 years. It's where I would look at proportionality. And it needs to be an emergency or an unexpected or a situation that's otherwise very difficult to manage. And there are a number of different circumstances that emerge within public appointments, and I'm sure you'll be familiar over the years with what some of those look like. People do become unwell, people don't get reappointed sometimes by ministers, and that can cause a little bit of a glitch in the system. I think there is something to be done across all departments to best plan public appointment processes going forward, to make sure they have got clear plans of action in all the departments, to make sure they know the dates when different appointments are coming up and needed to be done, to make it less likely. But certainly recent exemptions to the code were included when ministers chose not to reappoint. So that caused a hiccup.
Yeah, and I suppose that was kind of the crux of my question. How do you strike that balance between 2-month extension due to sickness or another ongoing issue versus a 2-year extension without really much of a justification. But thank you very much.
I mean, without the clear justification, or without, and then I would have conversations as well with the departmental representatives as well, to push them quite hard to maximise normality, if you like, the proper due process, to understand what the emergency is and to restrict it as much as possible so that the exception covers the emergency or the urgent situation rather than just make something a lot easier.
Okay, thank you. Sinead, please. Did you want to?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Commissioner, and you're very welcome here. And I wish you well in your post. 4.5 years, I suppose, of a gap is pretty significant. And there's a lot of catch up, and you're only in post now 6 months. It seems to be that you've come into a very depleted office, yes, really, and you're in the build stage. When do you think you'll have an operational plan in place in terms of going forward? And I'm very well aware that you've said that you've got 75 days and you need that increased. Is it important to get that increased sooner rather than later when you're in this building stage, trying to get your office into, fight ready and in shape in order to deliver the work that you need done? I'd be concerned that you're constricted even by your own, 75 days is not a lot.
It's not, and I have used them up.
I know. I can kind of hear that through the evidence that you've been given, because you literally are rebuilding something that has fallen by the wayside, and that takes a significant amount of work. You're starting from scratch, and when you look at those independent assessors, and you're saying that there's only seven of them still there, and you've only just made the appointment last week for auditors. There's a lot of work to be done, and you don't seem to have enough time. So can you talk through just...
It's very kind, and I appreciate that. I'm sorry if my tone came across as sounding like it was that I was doing too much work. It's a job I expect to do more than I'm kind of contracted for, really, is the way it looks. But it has been exceptionally busy, and I am very pleased to see now a team of staff in post, team of 3 staff. It would be sensible, in the way I see it, to increase my hours the same way that the previous 2 commissioners' hours were, so you're seeing like for like. If you're working 2 days a week, sort of an average, it's much more kind of engaged, and it seems to be a right amount of time to be across the decision making, the planning and the outreach, which are really a lot of where my responsibilities sit. But resetting up the office, it was really re-establishing the regulatory functions. And as I did say, when the staff, no issue with the staff who were in the office while there was no commissioner in post. They did a fabulous job. But setting up the new office and getting staff in post, there's been a little bit of turnover of staff, so people in and then people out. And I now have a team of 3, so it does take a while to get those staff in. But I do have a plan of action. We've just finished looking at our end of year kind of planning and looking at what the plan looks like for next year. My business plan and my operational work will fall directly out of my statutory functions. Yeah. So it'll be quite straightforward and quite clear. I will look at the statutory function and then plan a programme of outreach, audit, complaints handling, engagement, inquiries of departments, and make sure that those are done in a conclusive kind of a way, so that there's something material at the end of the first year to report on that moves forward the gap in regulation.
Okay. Thank you. And I think probably it's something that we as a committee need to probably pick up with the Executive Office in relation to the days that you're working, to see if they have got a plan to increase that, because when you're setting up or starting back in an office that there has been no commissioner for years, it's really important that we get it right and we get on our feet sooner rather than later. There's been enough time. To the Executive
Office, I have put it to them already, and they've indicated they're not unsympathetic, but they have no money.
Is that you? Yeah. Thank you, Pam. I think
thanks, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for your time here today. Not really a question, just want to thank you for your time, committee, and wish you all the best. With clearly quite a role to do in the short number of hours, so I wish you and your team all the best with that going forward. I suppose maybe just a very quick query, and we'd noted that you don't have yet kind of social media presence or anything like that. is that something that's going to come in time?
I think it will come in time. It's not been the number one on my list to generate social media activity. It's been number one on my list to try and steady the ship, make sure that departments know that we're up and ready for business, and that make sure we can actually deliver the independent assessors, the advice, the support and the training, rather than generate social media noise.
Yes.
It's been my priority,
It's
really.
not always helpful. But I suppose just in terms of outreach and general knowledge around your role, it's useful from that.
It is. I mean, certainly in terms of outreach, so on the next year's plan, I'll be doing in-person outreach. I'll be doing public workshops so that people who are just interested in public appointments can come either on a virtual basis to a conversation about what public appointments are, and I'll do some in person, and I will go out to a range of groups and organisations. And I have met already with organisations like the Public Sector Chairs Forum, so I'm already kind of out there in the world. But no, in terms of generating the social media noise, it's not been the top of my list, to be honest.
That's great, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. Really appreciate your time to that committee, and like others, we just like to wish you well in the months ahead. We certainly have a few things that we will now decide and agree on to follow up with the Executive Office, and we'll hopefully be able to provide you then with those updates as well.
Thank you very much all for your time and your interest. And really, I say it again, public appointments matter that they're done right, because public services matter, and they matter to all of us. So good luck, and thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Claire. Okay, members, will we keep going now, yes, at this stage, yes?
Yes, I can run through actions.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so if you would, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So I think the first one that I had noted down was obviously just to get an update on potential for the department bringing forward update to the order and any other legislative update that they feel necessary. Also, questions around the resource that the office and commissioner has, including the amount of days they can work, but also whether or not there are other updates in terms of getting assessors in the door and how the department can help with that. I know that Philip had asked, and it's something that we can chase up internally, just for the most recent example of an upheld complaint, and ask the Commissioner to provide that, so we'll keep an eye out for that. And then also, I thought when the Financial Provisions Bill was again mentioned, that's something that's going through Finance Committee at the minute, so it might be worth, if members are happy, that I'll liaise with the Clerk for the Finance Committee and just find out whether anything has been discussed in relation to the Commissioner for Public Appointments as such, or whether the department in terms of finance has looked at any amendments for that. I don't know. Committee can also write to DOF and ask whether it's something that it is thought about while bringing amendments forward for that bill.
Okay, would you like in, Carol?
Yeah, it's just that I don't understand under page 63 of the pack, TEO unregulated. When you have the Attorney General, obviously the Commissioner herself and her office, Community Relations Council, I don't understand why they're unregulated.
Yeah, they've been so long established.
Oh God, yeah. So could we maybe write off and ask for a rationale for that? Because I see the Police Ombudsman's office is regulated, but the Attorney General is not. Yeah. The Commission for Victim Survivors is regulated, but the Victims and Survivor Service isn't. I'm just struggling to find out why they're there instead of there.
We can certainly do that for TR, that's no problem.
And can we then also, just in that correspondence, and check in terms of what additional ones, I think obviously the Irish Language Commissioner, etc., but they're just the other list.
Newer bodies?
Yes, newer bodies since 2020. Go ahead please, Timothy.
When I had asked about the unregulated bodies, essentially her own unit, she had said about having a conversation with the TO, with the Executive Office. Is that something we could chase up to see what their plans are? Of who's going to regulate that going forward?
No problem.
It's always an interesting question, who regulates the regulator.
Any other?
That's fine.
Anything else? No? Okay, members, then moving on to item 7, the oral briefing from the Clerk of EU Interparliamentary Affairs, EU matters. So I'm going to refer you to pages 73 to 81 of your pack for a written briefing paper, and I'm going to welcome to the committee Fergal McGuinness, very welcome. He's the Clerk of EU and Interparliamentary Affairs here at the Northern Ireland Assembly. So thank you very much for your submission. It was incredibly detailed and very well laid out for us lay people, so really appreciate your time in pulling that together. Would you like to make some introductory remarks?
Certainly. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. I'll give an overview of just a few of the members, a few of the areas covered in the paper that I sent you. In particular, common frameworks, the UK-EU reset, and the independent review of the Windsor Framework. But just before that, just say a bit more about my role as Clerk of EU and Interparliamentary Affairs. I'm part of the Assembly Secretariat, and my job is to support you and other committees in your scrutiny on issues arising from EU exit. So I'll outline the issues, then be very happy to have a discussion with the committee about areas where you might want to delve deeper or what options there might be for further scrutiny. So starting with common frameworks. As a reminder, these set out the working arrangements between the UK and devolved governments in defined policy areas, namely those ones that were formerly governed by EU law but which intersect with devolved competence. The aim is to ensure that each administration is following a common policy approach so that the UK internal market can continue to function, to meet international obligations, ensure access to justice and so on, but still acknowledging that there can be policy divergence. So I thought the committee might welcome an update in the timetable for agreeing the frameworks. The Assembly started its scrutiny of individual frameworks in 2020, and there are about 30 frameworks currently progressing through the programme. Most of them are operating provisionally and have completed scrutiny by committees in the different legislatures, but are pending final sign-off by ministers. Now, when my predecessor briefed the committee last year, it was expected that the frameworks would be finalised in spring 2025. Latest position is that we're expecting some frameworks to be finalised and published by March this year, although the four governments haven't confirmed which ones those will be.
Sorry, could you just pause a wee second, Virgil? Could you maybe close that window as well? Apologies for the background noise. Just a wee second, thank you.
No worries.
That's better. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, please.
Sure. Now, once the frameworks are finalised and published, we'll see what changes the governments have made following the scrutiny process or following lessons learned in the provisional operation of the frameworks. But we'll also enter a new implementation phase. And that raises a question of how executive departments will continue to keep committees up to date regarding the operation of the frameworks, especially if departments and the governments choose to make changes to the frameworks following regular reviews. So there's a question there if the Executive Office intends to lay down a common approach for how departments should approach that. I'll move on to the UK-EU reset negotiations. As you'll know, the UK government is seeking to negotiate agreements with the EU in different areas following the summit last May. That includes the SPS agreement, an agreement to link emissions trading systems, and a youth experience scheme. And the UK and the EU have agreed to conclude those negotiations by the time of the next summit, which is still to be confirmed. Now, as to where the executive comes into this, the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister discussed the progress of and priorities for those negotiations with ministers from the Scottish, Welsh and UK governments at the Interministerial Group on UK-EU relations, and that group last met on the 22nd of January. UK government will also be introducing primary legislation that's required to implement the agreements. And as you'll know, where legislation relates to devolved matters, the UK government would typically engage the executive and seek agreement from ministers here. So we may expect a legislative consent motion there. Finally, I'll say a few words on the government response to the independent review of the Windsor Framework led by Lord Murphy. You'll recall the review made 16 recommendations. Some of those concerned the work of the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee, but others refer to the work of the Executive Office, so will be of more direct interest to the committee. And those included recommendations around the work of the Executive's Brussels office, in particular that further Northern Ireland civil service staff should be seconded or added to that office, especially to deal with new EU regulations. And the UK government also proposed a triage mechanism so that proposals relevant to Northern Ireland could be identified at an earlier stage. Just to also point out, the review noted suggestions that there should be greater transparency and openness in the work of governance structures around the Windsor Framework. Those include the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee, which is at the ministerial level and attended by First Minister and Deputy First Minister. And there's also the Specialised Committee, which is at official level. Now, the specific recommendation from Lord Murphy centred on broadening the inclusion of stakeholders in those forums. But just to point out to the committee that the House of Lords Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee, they made a similar point about the transparency of the forums in their recent report last October. Chair, that's a very quick overview.
I was reading a paragraph there, apologies.
But it covers some areas where the committee might want to consider conducting further scrutiny or seeking further information from the Executive Office. But obviously, I'm happy to work with Nick and the other committee staff to support you in that. But happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you very much, Fergal. Appreciate that, and I really do appreciate that we emboldened the areas for further scrutiny and follow-up, so that was extremely helpful. Just going to start off, obviously, with the common frameworks. This has been a recurring theme at this committee in terms of them being operational at a provisional level, and I'm just wondering, and I think the hazardous substances one keeps being held up as the one that's actually over the line with the rest aren't. So just wonder if you could give us a wee bit more of an update in terms of how close the rest of those are in terms of getting signed off by the 4 governments and what resources are needed locally to make sure that that happens from our end, please.
Yeah. So the Parliamentary Secretary at the Cabinet Office wrote to the Constitution Committee and the Scottish Parliament on this in January to give a bit of a fuller update, which is helpful. So he estimated that approximately half of the frameworks are almost ready for finalisation and publication in Q1 2026. Approximately half, so I think half might be on the high side. Now, there are a couple of issues which have led to the finalisation of other frameworks being delayed. And the Scottish Government, Angus Robertson, the Cabinet Secretary, outlined those in his own letter to the committee. Namely, firstly, the interactions with the UK Internal Market Act. Now, if it's helpful, can go into a bit more detail.
No, please do, because that was actually the next question. So if you want to keep going, please.
So, background on the UK Internal Market Act, it introduced market access principles. Firstly, non-discrimination in regulations with respect to goods or services from elsewhere in the UK. So they cannot be discriminated against in one part of the UK. But also mutual recognition of regulations that apply elsewhere in the UK, which is to enable goods and services to be sold across the UK. Now, the different administrations can seek exclusions from the UK Internal Market Act. One example is the exclusion on single-use plastics that was originally agreed at the request of the Scottish Government. And the UK Government committed to introducing some more changes to the exclusions process when it reviewed the UK Internal Market Act last year. However, in some areas, the Scottish and Welsh governments have stated that they still don't feel that the review offers the necessary assurances for them to sign off on frameworks affected. They've publicly identified the Resources and Waste Common Framework as one example of that, where one of the sticking points related to the Welsh Government's deposit return scheme. Now, there has been an announcement about that in the past couple of weeks, about an exclusion being agreed. I understand the Welsh Government are seeking an additional exclusion. But that's where the UK Internal Market Act is having an impact to delay finalisation. Second reason why we're seeing a hold-up now is associated with the SPS agreement currently being negotiated with the EU, where that would introduce dynamic alignment with EU regulations, so would remove some of the need for a common framework to align between the different parts of the UK. So we'll see how that works itself out with the negotiations. The Scottish Parliament have made the point that even with that agreement, it is important that dynamic alignment still leaves space for the administrations to legislate.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you, Fergal. In your submission, you did say that the Welsh and Scottish governments are opposed to the Act, owing to its impact and devolution, and calling for it to be repealed. And I'm just wondering, can you give an assessment of how you think this will be resolved? What would be the implications for Northern Ireland? Like, what are you hearing from other departmental officials and the other devolved administrations, for example?
I think the Welsh Government welcomed the announcements made by the UK Government as part of that review, and the focus on the commitment to common frameworks introduced there. However, they are non-statutory commitments, and I think they wanted to see the statutory commitments. As to how that will work itself out with agreeing common frameworks, I think that's an area, Chair, where it may be prudent to seek further information or clarity from the Executive Office as to how they see that unfolding. I would say the information about common frameworks in the public domain is very limited, in that, you know, in some cases scrutiny has happened quite a long time ago, and we're still waiting for the final frameworks to be published. And in that case, you know, I'm not sure about the practice in other committees, but there is an issue about how does the Assembly continue to be updated on what's happening with those frameworks in the meantime, or what changes are being considered where some time has elapsed since scrutiny.
I fully understand that, and maybe just leading on from your response there in terms of that sort of oversight and sort of political level engagement around it. So you again, in your submission, you talked about the FM and DFM meeting with the UK government ministers in the East-West Council, and they've had 3 meetings. So just really a readout of your effectiveness of these meetings in terms of the ability for our leading politicians to be able to engage on these issues of substance.
Yeah, so just firstly to clarify, I'm not sure of the position of the East-West Council with regards to common frameworks.
But I mean, in terms of more than just the EU affairs, that in its broadest sense then.
Well, what I would say is, with all of these meetings, there is very limited information on the outcomes of meetings, in some cases what's on the agenda. This does vary, and from one meeting of one body to the next, the readouts can vary quite a lot too. So I think this is an area where it would be helpful to get a bit more clarity on kind of what outcomes ministers are seeking or what positions they're reflecting in those discussions, what outcomes have been agreed, because currently we don't have a lot to go on.
Thank you. And finally from me then, you talked about Lord Murphy's independent review of the Windsor framework and the reference to the recommendation to expand the role of the Brussels Bureau, for example, and I think you touched on it briefly there, but I'm just wondering in terms of the acceptance of the Executive Office and government in general here in terms of picking up those recommendations and delivering upon them. So I'm just wondering if you can give us an update on progress on those. Thank you.
Yeah, again, I think to get an adequate update on the progress, that is one that the Executive Office would have to advise on directly.
Okay, no, appreciate that. Deputy Chair, please. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for indeed what is a very comprehensive paper to us. In paragraph 6, and I think as Chair was alluding to this earlier, where you say that not all frameworks are in a position to be signed off, and the Scottish and Welsh governments have raised concerns about the operation of some of the frameworks. What mechanisms are there in place to resolve those issues? They just can't go on forever. So is there some either form of dispute resolution, or basically does the UK government say, well, time's up and this is what's happening?
My understanding is that these have to be agreed between the governments. Now, part of the issue is with that interaction with the UK Internal Market Act, where an exclusion is sought by one government. Now, the objection previously would have been that, well, we want an exclusion, but it is, it is basically in the UK government's power as to whether they implement that exclusion or not. I think the review of the Internal Market Act last year sought to address some of those concerns. With regard to dispute resolution and requirements around reviews of frameworks, I think there will be particular arrangements stipulated in the provisional frameworks in the different areas, but I'd be happy to come back with further information on that just to clarify how that process works.
Yeah, that's helpful. In paragraph 17, you've set out very clearly about the intergovernmental structures and the meetings of the various intergovernmental groups, the Prime Minister heading the Devolved Governments Council, which includes our First and Deputy First Ministers, the Interministerial Standing Committee, Interministerial Standing Committee on Finance, and various other groups. How can we, as a committee, particularly in relation to the Executive Office, get a readout on what is going on inside those meetings, so that we can see for ourselves and hold our First and Deputy First Minister to account for their actions with those meetings?
Yeah. So, as we discussed, at the moment, we do get a communique following these meetings. We don't always know when that's going to come. Sometimes there's quite a lengthy delay between the meeting happening and the communique being issued. Not always. As to what the committee can do, maybe an area where the committee wants to consider requesting information from the Executive Office as to when meetings are happening, requesting an update from the Executive Office as to what they expect to be discussed at the meeting, what their priorities are, and that the Executive Office could update the committee following the meetings as to what was discussed and any outcomes agreed.
Do you believe that we should have access to what may be described as the working papers of those meetings, not just the minutes of the meetings?
Well, I'm not sure what those working papers would
neither
comprise. So, again, I think it's a first step, seeking further information from Executive Office colleagues as to what these involve, and then the committee
could go on a voyage of discovery thereafter. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Pam, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your time here at committee. I was wanting to ask, kind of on the back of the mention of the Murphy review and that, in terms of issues that arise or problems that arise relating to the Windsor framework, do we have officials who log those issues? That's the first question. And if so, who are those officials? Which department do they come from? And how are those issues and problems collated, and how are they shared?
Okay. When you mention issues arising from the Windsor framework, what kind of status of issues do you have in mind?
I suppose complications, things that we need to know, I suppose, in Northern Ireland. So if something arises, is somebody watching out for that? Is somebody gathering that information? Do we have officials that do that work?
So I think there are a number of different potential channels here. So for example, the Department for the Economy will have its stakeholder forums where it will be in regular touch with business. The Cabinet Office has also set up very recently a Northern Ireland business stakeholder group, and there's a direct channel there between businesses and UK government, and that's intended to input into meetings of the Specialised Committee on the implementation of the Windsor framework. There's also a civic working group which is convened by Queen's University, and which again inputs before meetings of the Specialised Committee. So there are channels there. As to how individual departments process the issues or record them, I'm not sure what the practice will be in different cases, but I think there certainly would be a number of channels by which departments could log the issues. And of course there's the work that's done by committees here, Economy Committee and the Area Committee as examples where they've recently looked into Windsor framework related issues.
Do we have officials then, or?
Well, if you mean in the Assembly or in the Executive, and I can't speak for how... You mentioned
departmental officials there, Economy, you said stakeholder, are they?
No, they have stakeholder forums as to how they process Windsor framework issues. I don't know what their internal processes would be or how they're set up to track issues. It's definitely an area where the committee could seek further information, further clarity on what that looks like.
I'm just asking quite a simple question, trying to find out if we are actually logging these issues relating to the Windsor framework.
I think it depends what we mean by logging issues. Like, I'm in regular touch with colleagues, certainly in the executive office, and obviously you had the Brussels office in front of the committee a few weeks ago, and they are looking at new regulations or replacement regulations on the Windsor framework. So I think there is a lot of activity on the executive side, but I can't comment on what sort of like architecture or form that describe what form that takes. But again, it's something that we can find out from the departments.
Okay, I think we can ask them a question then.
Well, maybe I think Nick's taking note of those queries anyway, so I can talk about those then. Philip, please.
Thank you, Chair, and Fergal, thank you very much. So just from the outset, who do you report to? Are you under the auspices of a particular committee, Democratic Scrutiny Committee?
No, I work across committees, so I'm part of the Parliamentary Services Directorate here in the Assembly.
Perfect. So just follow up on my colleague's question. So you personally or your Secretariat do not keep a central log, for example, of issues of concern that individuals, businesses, community organisations may have with the current implementation of the Windsor framework?
If you're asking, like, is there a master list?
Yeah.
No, there's no master list.
Okay.
However,
Why
we
not?
do. Well, I think, Philip, there are issues that sort of are raised week to week, how those work themselves out.
Uh-huh.
How we understand them. It's that's where I suppose where we start making a list is like it's I think there's some fluidity there.
Yeah.
Like, certainly we do prepare the weekly newsletter, which we send out to quite wide audience. I think some of the members will receive that, where we're sort of addressing issues that are arising, that are being picked up, that are being reported. With regard to spotting issues early, I think part of the issue is when we encounter issues. We're a very small team,
Mm-hmm.
and part of that identification of new or replacement acts is, some of that work is being done by the Brussels office, which is larger infrastructure too, to identify things that might be coming up.
I just think it would be something worth considering that, and the executive ministers / departments may do different things, but as Assembly members, I just think that it would be a useful document or working brief to have that, and listen, I understand some of these are politically sensitive, but there are issues which all people are united on, so be that around second-hand car registrations, be that around the issue of dental amalgam, be that around the issue of business-to-person parcels. So there are issues that all MLAs should be, and I assume are, concerned about, but there doesn't seem to be a resource within the Assembly in which that's currently collated. As I say, executive departments have a different approach. The Department for the Economy used to have a central list. They've abandoned that process, and that's a matter for them. But in terms of Assembly members having that available to them, is that something that can be looked at or discussed?
Look, like as I said, my role is to support you and other committees with your scrutiny. So if there is an area like that where members would be keen for more support, more than happy to look at how we can help you with that. Like, I would say it doesn't mean that we are not aware of a lot of live issues. Yeah. I guess why I was sort of stumbling with Pam's question,
you
was like, is there is the proposal for some sort of what do you have in mind? Is it some sort of tracker or something like that?
I think a tracker
and
would just be very, very useful. Issues coming
in that.
down the line, issues that have been resolved, issues that may require assembly intervention, which may require departmental intervention, issues that are being worked through. I just think it would be useful. I don't sit on the Democratic Scrutiny Committee, thank goodness. And, so I have no idea about the vast amount of stuff that's going through that, and I think they clearly dedicate a lot of time and resource to that. But I'm just wondering, is there a resource that could be pulled together that all
well, Democratic Scrutiny Committee is a good point, because they do have a tracker of things that are coming to the committee. So I wouldn't want to duplicate that.
No,
but I
of
think
course.
there's a sort of broader point here about what you've alluded to with new car sales, like wider issues that are not to do with new or replacement acts, but reflect the outworkings of the Windsor framework.
Okay, no, that's useful. And then, have you done any work in terms of, Murphy review recommendations, those that have been implemented, those that are currently being worked through, and those that the government haven't yet enacted?
Yeah, so this is something where I've been speaking with colleagues in the executive office. I understand those discussions are at an that engagement is at an early stage with Cabinet Office. Again,
for example, they've done some things. So the business stakeholders group. So for a long time, that group excluded the Road Haulage Association because they kept highlighting the fact that the Northern Ireland Protocol was increasing the cost of goods here in Northern Ireland by 27%. So they kept the RHA off that. Thankfully now, following the Murphy Review, the RHA are on that. One of the recommendations in the Murphy Review was the creation of this one-stop shop. UKG in October made the announcement of the £16.3 million, and some of that's been worked through. So it might be useful. I'm not saying it's your job to do, but that a resource was available to colleagues to say these were the recommendations from the Murphy Review and the review of the internal market. These are the things that the government have already commenced, and those are the announcements that are being made. But that's just my thoughts. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Timothy, please.
Yeah, thanks very much for coming along, Fergal. I suppose just want to pick up on points that have already been made about a list and compiling a list. I would look at it as more of a resource and sharing between departments. Give you an example I've been working on since last week is to do with plant health, where essentially it's a dear issue where there's nurseries have been trying to bring in tomato and pepper plants to sell in the next number of months for their summer sales, and there has been a change in the regulation which was brought in on the 1st of January 2025 where they take, so that was when the regulation came in. Last year the process was that they sent out somebody to each nursery to test 20% of the stock, so the products arrived to the nursery, there was no issues, they'd done their tests back at the lab in Dundonald, whereas this year there's been a change that once the lorry comes in, the consignment comes in, 20% of the stock will be removed in the docks, and there's a whole issue of, well, who's responsible for that stock? If that stock's damaged, who's going to compensate those that have ordered it? So it's an economy issue because it's affecting a seller. It's also a DAERA issue because it's DAERA's wanting to do the check. So I think that nails where the importance is, that there's a central list, a resource where we can understand the different issues that exist out there, which is cross-departmental. And I think that would be very, very helpful. And that's touching upon, obviously, the issues that have been raised regarding the second-hand car sales. And that's just a small issue that's affecting a number of people, but it's a big issue because it's spanning across the department. Moving on to some of the things I wanted to raise with you was the 30 frameworks. And so what extent is Northern Ireland subject to them more so than England, Scotland and Wales? Does that really boil down to that there's 300 areas of law which are still governed by the EU that exist in Northern Ireland and don't exist in England, Scotland and Wales?
So, in some areas, the Windsor framework will interact with individual frameworks. I don't have the information to hand as to how that would work. There are some bilateral frameworks between the executive and UK government, so it's certainly not a kind of case that this does not apply to Northern Ireland, but it's for the other administrations to work out between themselves.
So the frameworks apply to Northern Ireland because of EU law. They're more subject, and we are being more exposed to the frameworks because of that.
That's not what I was trying to explain. I think there's areas where, first of all, it would be which areas are within devolved competence. As to the interaction with EU, continued application of EU law and Windsor framework, I'd need to come back to you on that one, Timothy. I wouldn't want to give you a misleading answer on it.
If you could follow up with that, we'd much appreciate. So if the SBS agreement happens, which will result in GB being subject to dynamic alignment with respect to the SBS with the EU, so we are already subject to dynamic alignment. Would you expect, if the agreement is reached, that them 30 frameworks, some of them will disappear, or they will be reduced in length? What will the outworking of that be?
Yeah, so good question. I think at the moment, based on what's public, we don't know kind of what will be the status of those frameworks. Certainly, there is the Common Frameworks Programme. Some frameworks can be paused or removed, recategorised from the programme. We've seen that in a couple of cases. For example, recently the Mutual Recognition of Professional Qualifications framework was paused because there was assessment that it was no longer needed. Now, with the SPS agreement, the governments haven't confirmed which frameworks are in scope of that. That might be because we don't know what the agreement is going to say and the full extent of that yet. But it's in the areas that you'd expect. So, as to what happens after the agreement and the status of the frameworks, I'd go back to what I said earlier about the wish that there should still be scope for some policy divergence where individual administrations want to go further, and that's something that the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government has pointed out. They've proposed disapplying the UK Internal Market Act in relevant areas, and then providing scope that the administrations could diverge further and introduce higher standards if they so wished.
Yeah. There's a common theme coming out that there's a lot of this where the information isn't forthcoming and essentially has been kept very close. Page 34 talks about the 6 specialised committees that sit under the joint committee.
Yeah.
We have probed this before. Can you share the names of them 6 committees? Can you share its membership, how seats are allocated, and some information on when these committees meet?
Yeah, I don't have the names to hand, but I can certainly come back to you on that. We do know that. As to meeting frequency, again, previous, I think with specialised committees, we do know when the committees have met previously. The specialised committee on the implementation of the Windsor framework meets quarterly. And as for representation, I think again, I don't have it to hand, but...
Is that information that's available, essentially the names of each specialised committee you've said that you have, but its membership and how seats at the table are allocated? Is that
not aware that is publicly available, but it is something that we could ask Executive Office colleagues if they could provide.
Is that something you can follow up and bring back to committee? The Joint Consultative Working Group, same idea. Do you know who sits in it? How seats are allocated?
No, but in this regard, we don't have the agendas or meeting dates for the Joint Consultative Working Group, and I think the what the UK government has said in respect of the group previously and most recently in its response to the House of Lords Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee report is that it needs to have that space for officials to thrash out issues, if you like. But understand the concern around transparency, but expect...
Thrash out what?
So if there are, issues that are coming before the group committee's implementation issues, say, where a position needs to be agreed, there's a problem arises, how are we going to fix this? I should say I have not attended a group, I don't know how they work, but speaking as a former civil servant, that space for issues be discussed sort of confident, with, candidly. So we don't have those details of that membership, the meeting dates or so on. I imagine there might be, it's something the committee could pursue. Happy to follow up on that too.
Partnership panel, is that the same?
Not familiar with the partnership panel?
Paragraph 37. Oh, sorry,
the Partnership Council.
Partnership Council.
No, so two agreements, the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement. The Partnership Council is the top tier of governance for the trade and cooperation agreement. It's also a ministerial forum.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while the First Minister and Deputy First Minister attended the recent meeting of the Joint Committee on 2nd February, I understand they didn't attend the meeting of the Partnership Council. So it's a different cast list for those two bodies.
Yep. Paragraph 44, the government has similar engagement with civil society organisations via a stakeholder group convened and supported by Queen's University Belfast. What's the remit of the stakeholders group and who sits in it?
So there are two informal groups established previously. This is going back a while, before the UK withdrew from the EU. There was a Northern Ireland Brexit business working group and a similar civic working group, which were brought together organisations. Now, as those organisations were there, the UK government used that as an opportunity to engage with those organisations to understand the sort of the concerns of Northern Ireland stakeholders. Recently, the Cabinet Office has decided to formalise the business stakeholder group into its own forum, but certainly the civic working group, it is independent of government, although Cabinet Office, I understand, intends to continue to engage with that group so that civic stakeholders' voices are heard.
Well, the government refers to what government?
UK government.
That's the UK government was referring to that. Going back then to paragraph 10, it talks about the UK government conducted a review of the operation of the Act last year. Then goes on to say the government was legally required to conduct a review of certain aspects of parts 1, 2 and 4 of the Act before December 2025. Have all them aspects been reviewed by the government, or is that still underway?
No, the response to the government published its review and the response to the consultation in, I think it was July last year.
So, required to conduct a review of the certain aspects of parts 1, 2 and 4, so that was by December, they done that in July 2025?
We published that response in July 25, yeah. And that was what we were discussing earlier about some of the changes to how exclusions can be agreed to the UK Internal Market Act.
No, that's grand. I suppose just to sum up then, very supportive of a cross-departmental list or a resource being collated so we can understand the pressures across different departments and the issues that are coming up. because something that happens in the economy just doesn't affect the economy department. It could also have the knock-on effect of the example I used for plant health, and I would appreciate if you can come back with, to try and give the committee an understanding of all these different committees, consultative forums, councils, whatever, who sits on them, how seats at the table are allocated, and where we find out the outworkings of them, because it seems to very much be that this is a closed house. I remember before when your predecessor was here, there was almost this pyramid effect where all these different meetings, all these different talking shops, quangos, you name it, all these layers of bureaucratic nonsense to cut through, and you never hear what's being talked at them or what the outcomes are. So if we can shine a light and understand more about it, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to follow up with Executive Office colleagues on that and see if they can provide the information to us. Just to come back in the kind of across departmental view of different issues. Now, you know, we can track issues here in the Assembly, and that is something like that we try and do on a sort of weekly basis to bring issues to members' attention through the regular newsletter. What we can do versus what departments will do, there will be a sort of difference in magnitude there, and kind of like in how this stage at which departments will be encountering proposals versus here. So I think, depending on sort of like, I fully understand where you're coming from and how this would be valuable, but it might be something kind of depending on what the committee thinks is needed, where it's more a request to the executive as to, can you develop a tool like this, maybe more beneficial, depending on sort of like what level of tool would be useful.
To me, this is the only mechanism that we could collate that information, with the silo mentality that, you know, happens right across government in Northern Ireland, across the executive. We need somebody to oversee that, to lift the problems out of ERA, communities, economy, wherever the problems come up when it relates to the Windsor Framework. And the Democratic Scrutiny Committee, like, I'm not on it. There's a lot of the issues they cover that I don't see the papers to. Whereas I'm on the TEO committee, this has it looks after EU affairs, so I believe this is the best placed body to try and collate that information.
Well, going back to just without, if
okay, I've just got one more to come in,
Chair.
please, Fergal, thank you.
So currently, as I mentioned, the DSC has its EU law tracker, so it publishes the papers coming before it. Cabinet Office also publishes explanatory memoranda on new EU regulations. So there is information out there, but I think, like as you've addressed and as Philip was saying, there is a broader issue about things that are outside the scope of those that content, and it's how we track that.
Okay, thank you. Anya, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Fergal. And just to say that a conflict of interest, I obviously sit on the DERA committee, so we would discuss an awful lot of these common frameworks, including ETS and SPS. Fergal, in the briefing paper, the British government is hoping to have an agreement early 2027 in relation to SPS. I suppose from the executive's point of view, have they sought any clarity at all from the British government on how any GB-only standards will interact with their EU-aligned system in areas that SPS doesn't apply to post-agreement?
Yeah, so as mentioned earlier, there's the interministerial group on the EU-UK relations. Now, I think the past, it met January, before that September and May, past 3 readouts of that. We know the group discussed devolved government's priorities for the negotiations and the progress of the negotiations, but without any information on what that was. So I think it's a case where we don't know what the executives, what priorities are, what representations that they're making.
And would there be, I suppose, would there be any way of getting those priorities?
I think it's if the committee wanted to write to the First Minister and Deputy First Minister and seek further clarity on, because they attend that group, So, you know, what representations have been made, or what
No, I think
what
that
common
would be,
negotiating position has been adopted, if any?
absolutely. I think that would be useful, Chair, because there is a number of other areas outside of SPS where there have been some issues identified, especially from other sectors, business sector, and I know was one, the construction sector is another. Fergal, just another quick question. I suppose post SPS agreement in 2027, what preparations are underway by departments and especially port authorities, just to in the lead into the transition to that?
That's a good question. I don't have that information, but I'm happy to raise it with colleagues in departments and see if they can provide further clarity.
Thank you, Fergal.
Okay, thank you. All right, members, I think that's everybody's.
So just a wee
Okay,
quick
no, go ahead,
question,
please,
just
Sinead.
a quick question just in the back of that. Can we be sure that there's any recommendations or any prioritisation at all from the executive going forward? You know, if we haven't heard from it, what the priorities are here, is there a chance that there aren't any?
I think we need to ask the executive.
Yeah. 'Cause that's probably more like it than it is. You know, I think it's been left to the various committees and departments to kind of prioritise the issues, but there is no joint voice from the TO that I can see or hear in any of these discussions at all. And Fergal, thank you very much for your paper. I really don't have anything to add because it was quite extensive. But you know, it is very complicated. We kind of got ourselves into this, and there's multi-layers, and there are problems. And well, it's not of our making, some of them. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Again, it was really, really informative. Appreciate your time, Fergal. So we'll just follow up with some of the suggestions that you'd put forward.
Thank you,
So thank
Fergal.
you for now, Fergal.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay, members, we'll just do a quick recap and then we'll take a 5-minute comfort break. Go ahead, please. Go
Thanks,
ahead.
Chair. I have 19 different actions at this point. However, I think there might be a couple actually.
Order, please, members. Order, please.
There might be a couple more that have come out that I perhaps haven't noticed. So, if a committee are happy enough, I would actually quite like to watch this back, and then sit down with Fergal, and the two of us between us can get exactly all of the actions of the way, because there was an awful lot there, and I don't want to miss something out. So if you will bear with me, I will come back to you once I've had a chance to have a look at this and get a list of all the actions if members are happy with that.
And will you reflect then in terms of his suggested
Yes,
areas in the paper? Because
yes, Chair, there are a number of suggestions in Fergal's paper as well, and I think most of them were touched on, but certainly we'll sort of need those into, and I'll come back to you with a much more substantive list of things that we can move forward on, whether we're talking to TEO, UK government, other bodies. Then, if you could leave that with me, I will come back to you, I promise.
okay, thank you so much. Go ahead, please.
On the suggestion of a central list of issues, is that something that...
I think Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee would be very helpful in that, and I will talk to the clerk of that committee. I share an office with the clerk of that committee, so I'm sure that they have mechanisms in place as to how they're getting information from departments. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I'll follow that up as part of this action list for sure.
Because of our role in EU affairs, I think if they have a mechanism to create that it should be shared with us.
No problem. That's on the list.
Sinead, please.
Yeah. I wonder, is there any way that we can get an update from the UK government as well? Obviously, there's very high-level conversations taking place to build closer relationships with the European Union, be that around defence or other things at the minute, and they seem to be quite advanced. And it will have an impact on absolutely everything that we have been discussing today. So is there any way that we can get that high level update on just what discussions are taking place and what does that envisage and the impact that it would have on the Windsor Framework and its workings?
Yes, no problem.
Can I just ask a small question? I wasn't confident enough to ask Fergal because it's just one of those things. I just know the broad strokes of it. But one of the things that did make me curious, see all these different boards, bodies, committees, who do they all report to? And how does that reporting take place? Is it by minute or is it by summit, or because there's quite a lot of aye.
Yeah.
Aye.
Chair, yeah, it's a very good question. And again, it's something that we can try to get to the bottom of this. But I'll come back to members with a more definitive list once I've had a chance to.
Okay, members, are we content then to take a 5-minute comfort break?
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Thank you.
Updated draft final report into our gaps in equality legislation inquiry. What we agreed was that because there's the ongoing court case that the Equality Commission is involved in, that to ensure that our report is as complete as possible, we will await the outcome of that, and then the Equality Commission's ability then to reflect on it and perhaps give us an update in terms of where they feel that there are those gaps. Is that fine? That's fine. Okay, members, agreed then, we'll pause.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, members, just moving on then, item 9, correspondence, and I'm going to refer you to pages 147 to 150 of your pack for a summary of the committee correspondence, and I just want to draw your attention to a number of items. So 9.2, the NIO, the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill, and you'll find this correspondence on page 151 to 154. So just to advise that the committee has received a response from the Northern Ireland office to the committee's correspondence on the 19th of January 2026 regarding the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill and any engagement that has taken place with victims and survivors. The NIO outlines that there has been engagement at official and ministerial level with the Northern Ireland Victims Commissioner and the Victims and Survivors Forum, organisations funded through the Victims and Survivors Service, and others such as the Northern Ireland Veterans Commissioner's Office and the Northern Ireland Retired Police Officers Association. They also indicate that the UK Government will continue to engage closely with all interested parties, including the committee as the bill continues its parliamentary passage. And so I'm just going to ask your agreement to note this item and to keep a watching brief on this issue.
Great.
Okay, thank you. I'm just wondering, just I made a wee note to myself there, Clerk, is there any way maybe that we could share this correspondence with maybe the groups that were represented last week or the Victims Commissioner, just to sort of keep them involved of what has been said by the NIO in terms of engagement?
Certainly, yeah.
Are members okay with that?
No.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next item there is the correspondence from the TO in relation to the sectarian attacks in Derry/Londonderry. So I'll refer you to pages 166 to 167 of your pack, and just to advise that the committee has received this response from the Executive Office to our correspondence on the 30th of January of this year in relation to the sectarian attack in Derry/Londonderry. So just to remind you that the committee will receive an oral briefing from the Open University on its report Learnings from Why Riot, the Whys Behind Youth Violence, at our meeting on the 18th of March. And I just ask you to note this item. And again, I made a note to myself. I think that the letter that we sent was in relation to an update on how the Communities in Transition and TBUC is being delivered locally to address these issues, but I don't think the response did address that. So
We can go back.
I'm not sure whether there is an answer to that, but I just wanted to highlight that I didn't think the response was satisfactory.
If members are happy, we'll respond back.
Just because there are obviously two specific programmes that are meant to look at that. Okay, thank you. So 9.10, Committee for Finance, and this is for the Department for Education 5-year budget strategy. I refer you to pages 202 to 242 of your meeting pack. So just to advise, the committee has received correspondence from the Finance Committee regarding the Department for Education's 5-year budget strategy. Members may remember that the Committee for Finance had previously requested information on the purpose of the strategy if similar documents are expected from all departments, and whether the 5-year business plan, which all departments were expected to develop and publish as part of the budget sustainability element of the executive restoration package. The response detailed within the correspondence indicates that the education publication is different from the business plans expected. So I'm just going to seek your agreement to note this item and agree to write to the department to ask for an update on the status of the Executive Office's 5-year business plan and whether this has been finalised and sent to the Department of Finance, and if this has not been completed, then to ask for an indicative timeline for completion and that a copy is sent to the committee once finalised. Are we in agreement?
Agreed.
Okay, so thank you. I'm just going to ask the clerk to read some other items into the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Item 9.3, members, is from Advice NI and is around the automatic enrolment to free school meals for universal credit claimants. Item 9.5 is from Belfast Works Connect and is around sustaining place-based economy in activity support during the local growth fund transition. Item 9.6 on a similar issue is a note from the Committee for Communities on the local growth fund. Item 9.7, another note from the Committee for Communities on the draft budget of social and affordable housing. Item 9.8 is the Hansard report from the introductory briefing from the Commission of Victims and Survivors to the committee on the 11th of February 2026. Item 9.9 is the Hansard report, the introductory briefing from the Chief Scientific and Technology Advisor, also on the 11th of February 2026. And item 9.11 is from Legal Services. It's the 57th report of the Examiner Statutory Rules. And just to note, there are no rules for the attention of this committee.
Thank you very much. Does any members want to raise any issues in relation to correspondence? No. Okay, thank you. Are you clear about what actions then are coming off the back of that? Then go back to TEO and
yes.
Also, yeah. Okay,
that's
thank
right,
you.
Yes,
okay, so item 12 then, the draft forward work programme. I'm going to refer you to pages 252 to 254 of your pack for the updated forward work programme, and I'm going to ask the Assistant Clerk to talk through any changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So it's just to remind members, next week the committee will hear from Fiona Ryan, the Commissioner, and was saying to the Chair earlier, it's been since 2024 since the committee have heard from her, so it will be long overdue. We'll also have departmental officials to talk about violence against women and girls, the framework and the first delivery plan, and the committee will consider a written briefing from Migrants' Rights Network on immigration rates in Northern Ireland.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, are members content? Okay, thank you. Any other business, members? No. Okay, so date, time and place next meeting. So next Wednesday, the 4th of March at 2 p.m. in this room 30. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.